monsters! Good morning. Today I want to talk about recommendation engines. I want to talk about why I think VR is going to change some of this. And I also want to talk about why I split up my YouTube channel. Pardon the pajamas. I've got a talk at the Games Education Summit later today as well. If you are around, that's there. I'll be posting links on Twitter and everything. It's starting in about an hour and a half or so. The whole thing's on Zoom. It's free to watch if you're interested in games education stuff. I highly recommend it. I've been very lax about posting about it on socials. Having said all that, let's talk about recommendation algorithms and personally, like why I just split up a YouTube channel. The whole thing in the modern day and age, we all kind of know it. We face recommendation algorithms every day. Anyone who's making anything has to kind of make the robots happy to have their stuff found. First thing that people kind of go is like, oh, the algorithms are evil. But the honest truth is that the algorithms are much better than not having them. Now, there's a whole separate conversation to be had about ethical recommenders and why I think recommenders shouldn't be written by platform holders or by third parties, but should actually be written as a service specifically for you. Basically, YouTube's interests are not your interests, and having an algorithm that is written in your interests, the algorithm would be significantly better, whereas YouTube's algorithm's going to have slightly different goals and motivations. That being said, hand curation has a lot of the evils of, and some more evils actually, of recommendation algorithms, but we're less likely to call them out because it's one of those things. If it's always easier to dump on a robot than it is to dump on people. It's like algorithmic bias is a problem. We're talking about it. It's an issue, but so is racism. So is a lot of isms, and curation comes inherently with issues. But the biggest issue is curation doesn't scale, and there's a big difference between third-party or external curation, much like there's a big difference with external recommenders, versus platform curation. Platform curation is a dangerous thing because of how authoritative it is. Very, very dangerous. If you just happen not to be in the type of content that a specific platform wants to see, hand curation will basically mean you forever doomed. Whereas algorithmic bias, while it does exist, inherently we do try to minimize that kind of bias. And that does make people upset sometimes because they're like, why are we being recommended all this stuff? And it's like, turns out that's because that's what people like to watch or whatever. Anyway, we're not going to go too deep down that hole today. What I really want to talk about is VR curation. And I want to talk about VR recommendation algorithms and why I think this is all going to change and how this has kind of led into me splitting up a YouTube channel and to a skating YouTube channel. Because I am, for April, going to do a challenge where I've done it before, where I skate every day in a month and I film it. But it produces a lot of skate videos. And I was getting a bit nervous because I've gotten into a nice schedule of posting this VR-related game dev content to my channel again. And I was like, do I want to break it up? And more than the algorithm, the key thing that came to my head was if someone is there to watch game dev / VR videos and they see a feed of unrelated content, skate videos, in their thing, they're not going to like it. If you have a conveyor belt serving you savory food and then all of a sudden a bunch of sweet food comes along, you'll be like, but I installed this conveyor belt to get me savory food. So that's part of it. But, it would be very easy for me to basically say, well, I named the video this, I named the video that. You can, like at Yo Sushi or whatever, just watch the dishes you don't like, go on by and ignore them. That's where it gets tricky, because recommendation algorithms have a very hard job. They have two jobs, really. Job one is classification. They need to figure out what kind of thing your thing is. Now, the naive approach, and the approach that does help but can be very easily exploited, is to look at the self-described inserts. So the title, the description, the tags, the thing that the author of the content has control over. The problem is we don't really trust authors because they can be mean. Can you imagine the self-described tags on Happy Tree Friends? If you don't know Happy Tree Friends, it's a cartoon I got a lot of great pleasure out of, but it's shall we say mature. It used to be a joke that people would move to Happy Tree Friends DVDs, or yeah, there were always DVDs. I don't think there was ever VHS, because it was like 2000, 2001 they came out. I can't remember. Anyway, they would move the Happy Tree Friends DVDs from the adult animation shelf to the kids section. And at a cursory glance, it does kind of look like a kid's animation. And then eyeballs are being ripped out and being turned into slices for lemonade, and guts and entrails all over the place. So problematic in the kids section, one would say. I mean, there was parental tags on the things and stuff, but you know how people are. And you can effectively get the same robot mistake as the prank that people pulled in stores, because it's just a different kind of curation, shelf space curation. So self-described monikers are helpful but not to be trusted. So the other stuff we do is we do things like captioning, closed captioning. We look at the words used in a video or a piece of content, or if we have any other kind of way of breaking down the content, search for skin to find out if it contains nudity. Basically, search for melons and pickles. You know, it's actually really funny how people have started referring to the global pepperoni because they don't want to trigger certain keywords in their videos. There's a lot of that kind of behavior that builds up, but classification is a big part of a recommender's job. It's basically what kind of video content this is. The best thing, the most reliable thing you can do for classification is historic trends. What kind of viewers have watched this? What kind of videos or what kind of content does this creator normally put out on their channel? That's actually one of the biggest ones. What kind of viewers normally watch this kind of stuff? And algorithmic recommenders are very bad at the moment, and it's not to say they couldn't be better, but generally speaking, most approaches like to put creators in buckets. They like to say, this person makes horrific demon figures. And if that person who makes horrific demon figures all of a sudden made a really cute fluffy rabbit, the assumption would be that that cute fluffy rabbit at some point gets blown up, or some other thing happens to the cute fluffy rabbit. We as people are, especially artists, we can be full of contradictions and facets, but recommendation algorithms really don't deal well with that. Now, to be clear, with broad-scale marketing, even prior to recommendation algorithms, it wasn't unusual for authors to have a second pen name or whatever to split up their divergent content, especially if there was like some of the content was for kids and some of the content wasn't for kids. But the algorithms are reinforcing this. The algorithms are saying we really don't like it when you mix content up, which is a pain for some of us. And the algorithms could be better at letting us say, this is this type of content, this is that type of content, but generally they don't. So yeah, classification, big deal. I'll talk a little bit about how classification works in a bit, but the second part of the job is the algorithm has to figure out how good is this content. Now, almost no algorithm that is in use by a serious platform tries to establish a global quality value. Or at least if it does, the global quality value is not very important. It's the issue is that global quality is a poor measure. What is lovely for one person is terrible for other people. However, they do have a basic metric. Now, there are the first, I'll go through some very simple ways. The first thing you could do is you could say, how many people watch the video to the end? What's the completion rate? It's a good metric. That's something that people use. Given the thumbnail and the storefront presentation, description, whatever, what is the rate at which people click through to this content? How enticing is this content? Do people push the like button? Do people comment? Do people engage with the content? That's all the engagement metrics that we use. Also, I hasten to add that there almost no recommendation system I know of has a concept of negative engagement, which is problematic, because if you comment on a piece of content saying, this is utter shite, the recommendation algorithm goes, hey, they are heavily engaged with it. You can use a dislike button or a thumbs down button. Historically, studies have shown that they get abused. Right, so there's that. Other metrics they do: click-through rate, completion rate, engagement. If it's interactive content, you can do some stuff around how the person interacted with it. There is some specific platform stuff I don't want to dive too deep into, because recommendation algorithms are like secret sauces. They're a lot less valuable once people know the 11 herbs and spices. And there's a lot of similarities. Everyone's putting pepper and salt and garlic and those kind of goodies in. We've got these two problems. So classification and quality measurement for a given audience, or desirability. Let's call it desirability. So while we could do a global desirability, the more important way we do it is we classify it, and at the same time we classify our audience, and then we say this audience tends to like these categories. How desirable is this content for these audiences? That's a big part of it, because this creator may be putting out slightly different content or slightly different things, and we can figure out, if it's got these kind of things, it's always popular with this crowd, and things like that. And if you can go one further than group classification, you can actually go to a personal level. Now, it's quite rare, despite what some people think, for recommendation algorithms to work too much on a personal level, because you want to do bulk group processing. If you've got 1 million users, if you've got 1 billion users, you can, everyone's a unique snowflake and butterfly, and it's like, no, there's actually a shit ton of people who behave almost identical to you, and we can predict what your behavior is going to be based on what these people's behaviors are. So we have classification of both the content and the audience, and then we have desirability based on those two categories. That's how a lot of these systems work. In the old system, we would just do a general calculation of this and have it run at the time. Then what YouTube came up with is an expanding ring system. Obviously the details of the YouTube algorithms always a little bit disclosed, but we know through research, third-party research, but also through Google's own release papers, roughly how the ring system works. This is why the notification bell is so important, by the way. Your core viewers who watch everything you post, it gets notified and shown to that group of people, that inner circle. Based on that inner circle's behavior, we've got our initial small data set. And the desirability value is, say, between 0 and 1. If the desirability value is above a certain level, we expand the circle by a certain speed and a certain amount. And we show it to a wider circle of people. And then this will change the desirability values for the different cohorts as it rolls out. And then each basic circle it goes out. And this, you can see this in how videos pop off. A big factor that influences desirability factors is how much traffic is being driven to the website. How many people is it the first video they watch on the website? How many people is it a video link that brings them into the website? That kind of stuff. But we have this expanding circle model. And so that's how you can see a video gain recommendation traction over time. And then sometimes what will happen is a video will have been on the platform for a while, and then it'll get a small spike in traffic. And then what Google will do is it'll basically set up the circle again, and it'll re-roll it out. And that's why you can see a 7-year-old video all of a sudden just popping off. How that kind of system works. Full disclosure, I never got to implement that in Dreams. This was basically the model that everyone was using. But then TikTok came along and was like, fuck rings, we're going to go, we're going to go a lot harder on that initial circle. B, we have smaller form, shorter content, which means our curation algorithm can churn through a lot more. Depending on who you are, you'll focus on different parts of the equation. A lot of people who know the space argue that the real reason for TikTok's algorithms seeming so much better, the real reason for TikTok's success is actually short form video. The fact is that if you go onto YouTube and you watch 5 videos, most of which are 10 minutes long, and you only watch one of them to completion, because that's a lot of video watching, right? There's actually not that much data for the system to work with. With TikTok, with the short videos, in that same time you would have probably seen 500 TikToks, if not more, most of which you won't watch to completion. And that's just a larger data set. That, honestly, is the real success. It's the reason why you see YouTube doing YouTube Shorts. But if you can get short form content, if you can get the churn higher, the recommendation algorithm will just be better. Okay, so we need to put that out front, because I think that's the one, it's the least sexy thing to talk about, but it's really, really important. And it'll come back in our conversation about VHR and recommenders in a bit. The second part of the conversation is the cone expansion method. Basically, remember how I talked about those cohorts and that expanding ring? Well, TikTok leaned hard into that. First of all, TikTok is a lot more aggressive in that first stage. Basically, if there's a new creator on YouTube, no one's showing their videos. No one's showing their videos at all, because the risk is too high, the content's... But what TikTok said is, for your first 5 videos, we are going to guarantee X value of views. Unless we find something suspicious with the account or blah, blah, blah. Your first 5-ish videos, and they changed this up slightly, so this is slightly old now. For your initial content, we're going to pipe out, because we need to find out what kind of content you're making and how good your content is very fast. After that, we are going to assign your content a bunch of data tags, and we're going to assign your content, your channel, a desirability score or an authority score. And that's the initial TikTok thing. But then TikTok, instead of expanding out in rings, what they did is they say, based on your channel, we know it appeals to these groups of people. And rather than treating it as a ring expansion, we're going to treat it as a cone expansion. So we're going to shoot like 10 bullets out into 10 crowds. And if we manage to kill a few people in this crowd and a few people in this crowd, why am I using bullets? Throw candy out. And like people are like, yeah! And other people throw the candy to the floor. Basically, depending on how the individual segments work, they go hard on that segment. So turns out your video with kitty nestling on the chest does really well with lesbians and cat lovers, but the traction with cat lovers dies out after, say, 5 iterations, but the gay crowd is still running 12 iterations deep. So you can have this content that is hyper desirable in a certain segment, and so TikTok leans into that harder. And then the most controversial thing, which is almost a separate video and I don't want to spend too much time on, is we're trying to regulate recommendation algorithms a little bit better, but also there's some things in Western culture we wouldn't do that unfortunately TikTok does. They take skin color into account in their data. That's not to say that they penalize black people, but they say this video has black people in it. Does it do better or worse with this group? Likewise, they do geolocation, which means that videos shot in rural areas tend to do worse. But none of this is, they don't make any value judgments, but because they feed all that data in, and they take things like what model of phone do you have, which inherently does some wealth biasing. They put a lot of signals in that a lot of companies would not find acceptable in other countries. Now, that's not to say that, as I say, a lot of people incorrectly think that they are penalizing those categories at TikTok. No, what they're doing is they're feeding that data into the algorithm, and then people's own biases and cultural bullshit is doing that. That's one of the reasons we don't feed it in. The best way I can describe it is the difference between a US crime report and a UK crime report. It has been a policy in the UK for quite some time not to report the ethnicity of an offender unless it becomes super relevant in the story. By default, they avoid using the ethnicity of the offender. Whereas in America, by default, the ethnicity is included in the crime report. And as a result of that, there is a reinforcement factor that goes into crime reports, because there's all kinds of biases in how people choose what crime to report on and how they cover it. Curbs, some people do game the system where they put in fake data and stuff, but that's by the way, one of the reasons why a lot of the phone model stuff, and they actually identify if this phone's ever had a TikTok account before and all that kind of stuff. One of the reasons that's all in there is to detect zombie accounts and to detect spammer accounts and things like that. So it's not like there's all evil intentions here, but that's a factor. Okay. So now we have a grounding of this subject matter. Let's talk about why I think VR is going to change it. And the first thing you have to understand is with the classification problem. Now, there are different ways of doing it, but almost every way of doing it at some point has the data in a hyperdimensional space. Okay, what does that mean? It means at some point, the classification problem, if I was to give you a whole bunch of Lego bricks, and I was to say, lay all of these Lego bricks out in a room on the floor and sort them into piles, right? You would sort them into piles. Think of that as a 2-dimensional sorting space. But now, if I said to you, now take those Lego bricks and sort them in a line, notice you would you would lose a lot of the expressivity that the different piles of Lego bricks has versus having them in single file. That's a much harder problem. Well, algorithms, when they're working in classification, instead of working in 2 dimensions or even 3 dimensions, they tend to work in 128 dimensions, right? Mathematically, it makes a lot of sense. Visually, it's a complete mess. But you can easily understand if I said to you, well, instead of working in 2 dimensions, now work in 3 dimensions, right? It's easier to sort those piles. So generally speaking, most UIs try to sort things into the list. Terrible idea. You get a Netflix grid style UI, and now we're sorting things into 2-dimensional groups. I still think the grid's a terrible method, by the way. I think a much better and much more interesting method is literally to visually cluster and to have a space that can be freely explored in 2D, like Lego blocks poured out onto a floor. I think that's a much more human way. There's actually good studies about this because our brains have really good spatial temporal reasoning stuff, so we can kind of look at stuff and we can recognize patterns. That's another evil thing that recommenders do, by the way, that I don't want to go into because it's a whole different rabbit hole about how breaking your temporal your spatial temporal knowledge of a thing can make it look like you have new content and keep you engaged, and it's an evil manipulation technique that every major platform uses. It's bad. It's very, very bad. There's a good reason why, if you can sort stuff chronologically, you should sort stuff chronologically, because it's much easier to look at a Twitter list chronologically, say, and go, oh, I've seen all this content, and your brain dismisses it, versus if you shuffle content every time someone sees it, your brain goes, oh, this is new information, I must process it. And that's bad. That's really, really bad for people. But anyway, spilling stuff out onto the floor, much more interesting model. So, spatially, we can visualize about content. This is really helpful. But we can take it to the next level. Instead of spilling stuff out onto the floor, which first of all, there's only so much floor space, and if you're on 2D screens, not much resolution and stuff, it's not natural. But now imagine, if you go onto Netflix, imagine a full 3D space spawns around you in VR, and there's just clusters of content, and you can, like how in Dreams we pull ourselves into content. In VR, you can just pull yourself into this cloud of content. You can look there, and you can spatially reason about these clouds of content. You can go, oh, the murder mystery shows are over here. Oh, the comedy's over here, but there's this murder mystery dark show cloud over here, and visually explore the content. That's really, really interesting for how we can lay out and explore stuff in VR. And much like how I explained the Lego example of spilling Lego onto the floor and then piling it into piles on the floor versus a single file, and the single file being harder, turns out the computer's job for classification will be easier if it has to put it in a 3D space versus having to put it in a 2D or a 1D or a enumeration space. Enumeration space, I didn't cover this, but it's a different kind of thing where we take the hyperdimensionality space and we separate it into spatial clusters, and we basically say to the computer, like, here's 50 colored markers, go color in each thing and give them a number. But it's a different kind of single file organization. It's just single file organization with gaps, but it's worth noting that it exists. But yeah, it turns out computers, if they have to reduce a hyperdimensionality space of, say, 100 dimensions down to 2 dimensions or 1 dimension, really difficult. But it's much easier to do 2 dimensions, and it's much easier to do 3 dimensions. And we're not talking twice as easy. we're talking an order of magnitude easier to classify the content. So your recommendation algorithms would get more expressive, it'd have more nuance in them. And we'd be able to find content better. But that's not where it ends. Remember how I said short form videos versus long form videos and data? Where we fall on this falls on the creepy scale and how we think. Because, for instance, if I had a recommendation algorithm that was purchased by me and was working in my best interests and working in a way that I trust, right? So it's running on my computer or a personal cloud that I pay for, and the data is encrypted and the government doesn't get to see it, or it's not being sold on or whatever. It's my AI, I trust it. In which case, I'm willing to give it all of the information. Much like if you've got a personal assistant, like in real life, a person you hire, a personal assistant, they have access to your bank account, they have access to your calendar, they have car keys, they have house keys, they have everything, right? Because you trust them. Versus, say, a Google AI or a Facebook AI, that's real job is to sell me money. I want to give that less data. Google AI, personal AI, let's assume it's a personal AI and I trust it, right? So I'm giving it all my data. Let's work from that assumption. Much like how the TikTok algorithm has an advantage because you're scrolling through a ton of short videos and you can figure stuff out. In VR, we have how long do you linger here? How long do you linger here? What cloud do you pull into? Your mere navigation of the space is data, right? Unlike a 2D screen where we can't tell where your eyeballs are, we can't tell where your attention lingers. They do some things where, like, oh, your mouse cursor hovered over this video or whatever, but it's not a great representation. Whereas in modern VR headsets, we will have eye tracking, we will have all the things, and we go through and we'll be able to, with BCI even, we'll be able to figure out, oh, you're engaged in this makes you feel happy, this makes you feel sad, be able to recognize your mood and go, oh, you're in this kind of mood, you want this kind of content. We can do all these kind of crazy cool things if we trust the AI. That's a big if. If we trust the AI, we can do these very cool things where we can detect, oh, it's 5 o'clock, it's after work, you're burnt out, this is the kind of content you normally gravitate to. And if you're paying for this AI, it's like a monthly fee for this AI or whatever, it can still take that very personal data, boil it down into not very personal stuff, broad generalities, and send that off to a central processing cloud where the million other users of the surface are working, and that can collate into larger data sets to improve your personal recommendation stuff. Now, to be clear, that boiling down process and that correlation step, that's how a Facebook or a Google or a Twitter AI is going to say they're working. The problem is that if they're boiling it down, then, is this data really private? Well, it depends who's collecting it. There is no difficulty to make this data secure and private if the data is being collected by software that you trust, if it's being collected locally and being processed locally. Even if it's being processed remotely, the risk is relatively small, assuming the encryption keys are private to you. There's no backdoor to that. There is no way to trust that if it is built by a Facebook or a Google, because their incentives don't align with yours. And there's a lot of ways that can break down. So this is why I say we really do need personal recommenders. I mean, it's a battle I've been fighting for quite some time, but with VR and BCI recommenders in the near future, very likely to be our possibility, and the sheer power of those tools, I think the issue has become a lot more pressing. And the way we get there is through regulation. We already have some really good regulation in the UK and the EU that was actually driven by the UK and was actually driven by the Labour Party 15 years ago now, almost just over 15 years. They implemented this whole open data initiative, 2000 to 2005. They pushed it really hard. The Tories have rolled it back a little bit, but it's there, and that open data initiative actually is responsible for a lot of good stuff. But basically, if we say to companies, you have to provide certain data for people to be able to use, then it becomes possible to build recommendation algorithms as products, because they don't want, it's the worst fear of these platform holders. They don't want third-party recommenders looking at their content. In fact, people have tried to do it for things like YouTube, and YouTube have shut it down. It shouldn't be like that, though. But yeah, I mean, you can imagine a world in which certain broad-scale metrics are made available to people, and yeah, works through that. One of the ways we could do it, for instance, is you could make a browser extension now. That's a monthly subscription service, but the browser extension would have to scrape all the stuff you're viewing and would have to process it and work through it. Yeah, collate with other AIs and figure out bits and bobs. But you know, even without that correlation step, even if it's 100% local data stuff, you could do some pretty cool stuff. But the big thing for me is I think VR is going to change the data space, both in how we represent the UI and the UX for recommendation algorithms, but also how we generate data for the classification and desirability part of this problem. So I think both sides of the recommender problem are going to be easier, better, and more efficient in VR. And I think the sooner we move away from these standard grid 2D layouts, these really flat, boring ways of representing data, we're going to be in a better place. And I think even for a Google or a YouTube or a Facebook, that is true. That is generally true. But yeah, that's our little talk on VR recommenders. I should also say, by the way, if you're interested in the skate videos, the skate videos will be going up on this channel. So go off and you can give the skate videos a watch there. Yeah, I'll be giving the talk on C++ this afternoon at the Games 8 conference, and I'll see you when I see you all. Oh yes, because I am doing a challenge where I skate every day in April, and I am going to be starting my new job soon. It was meant to start tomorrow, but paperwork's been so delayed. And then I can tell you all what my new job is once I start it. I'm very excited to share that. Anyway, let's kill it there. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye bye now.